The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. As you can see, I have a new theme song for my podcast. My friend Steve thought that the theme song that I had chosen was kind of weak, so he went to his studio and he recorded this song. I think it's really cool. And you can find Steve on YouTube. Just type in Mr. and then space G-E-E. That's his YouTube channel. So thank you, Steve, for this great new theme song for my podcast. I really appreciate it. And today's podcast is brought to you by one of my sponsors, Riptide Pool Vacuum System. You can learn more about the Riptide Pool Vacuum at www.riptidevac.com. The Riptide Pool Vacuum is a really innovative system that will clean your pool if you have very large debris. They have two models. They have a commercial model and they have a new SL model that was just recently released. So be sure to visit their website and support my sponsor. Today's podcast, I'm going to go over everything related to a saltwater pool. I'm going to go over different saltwater generators. I'm going to also go over some tips and some myths about saltwater systems. I've become an expert on saltwater pools kind of by default. I have about 35 of these on my pool route, various systems. My area is dominated by Pentair, so I have a lot of the IC40 and Telechlor salt cells on my route. I also have a bunch of Hayward, Aquarite salt cells, some Jandy salt cells. So maybe you currently have a saltwater pool, or you're thinking about getting a saltwater pool. I'm going to go over some details, including some of the salt systems that I prefer. I'm also going to show you a really bargain system that just came on the market. I'll go over that one also. Okay, let me start by explaining what a salt cell does. Basically, it produces a chlorine gas in the pool. So for all intent and purposes, a saltwater pool is basically a chlorine pool. The inline salt system will generate chlorine. There's electrolysis that takes place. There's some metal plates inside the salt cell. They're charged with DC electricity. And in turn, this produces a chlorine gas. So one of the benefits of having a saltwater pool is that it's always producing chlorine as the salt water is generating when the pool is running. So that's a great side benefit. You don't have to add chlorine to your pool. You don't have to add tablets. If the salt cell is working properly, it'll generate chlorine and keep your pool chlorinated at whatever level you set the chlorinator for. Usually you can change it to a percentage, and this percentage will translate into parts per million. You got to kind of play with it depending on the size of your salt system, the size of your pool, how warm the water is, how much use you get out of your pool, and that kind of determines the parts per million. Usually you can get it to generate 3 to 5 parts per million no problem every day, and that sanitizes the pool water. Of course, with the salt water, you're still going to need conditioner in it because the sun's UV rays will still burn off the chlorine that the salt system produces, so you'll need a conditioner level of at least 30 parts per million, and you can go up to 80 parts per million safely with a saltwater pool. This will keep the chlorine in the pool as the sun hits it during the day. You also have to be aware that the salt chlorinator is only generating chlorine while it's running. So if you're running it for only 4 hours a day, it may not be sufficient to generate enough chlorine to sanitize your pool. Generally, saltwater pools, depending on the size, need to run for a good amount of time to generate enough chlorine to sanitize the pool each day. And every day it will start the process over again and chlorinate the pool for you. So it's very convenient. You don't have to add chlorine to your pool if everything is running fine. That's why people love the saltwater pools. It's a lot less maintenance because all you have to worry about is the pH, alkalinity. You don't have to worry about adding chlorine to the pool every day. So my pool route, I was mentioning earlier that it's dominated by the Pentair salt cells. A very good salt system, a little on the expensive side. Some benefits of the Pentair system, the IC40, IC20, the Telechlor, is that everything is inside the cell itself. So when you replace the cell every 3 to 5 years, and that's something I should mention right now, is that the salt cells do wear out. So you're looking at a 3 to 5 year lifespan with just about any salt cell that you purchase. So with the Pentair cell, all the electronics is actually in the cell. There's a power unit, but once you replace the cell, you're going to get all new electronics, which makes the cell a little more expensive also to replace. I believe the cells run anywhere from $500 to $700. So it's a more expensive system. Very reliable. I haven't had any real problems on my pool route with the Pentair salt cells. They're also very easy to operate. They have a very good display screen that tells you when you have to clean your cell. It shows you when the cell is actually producing chlorine. And you can set the percentage pretty easily on the salt cell itself. You can also connect the salt cell to an Easy Touch or IntelliChlor automated system, and you can also adjust the salt level in there. And the IntelliTouch system will also tell you the salt level in your pool, which is a nice little touch. So the Pentair cell dominates my route. They're actually a really good choice for a cell. Next up on my pool route is the Hayward cell. I have about 10 of those on my pool route. They're very good cells. The cells are a lot cheaper because the electronics is in a control box by the pool equipment. So when you replace the cell, you're going to save a little bit of money because it's actually just the salt cell itself with no electronics. It also has a separate flow meter, so it's just basically a cell, and those are really inexpensive to replace. I think they're anywhere from $300 to $400. So if you go that route, the cell's a lot less expensive. They're pretty reliable systems. They give you a good output, don't give too much trouble. The only problem you're going to have once in a while is the cell gets dirty. The salt level that it reads on the screen will be inaccurate. But other than that, the Hayward salt cells are a very good choice for a saltwater system. Then I have some Jandy salt cells on my pool route. They're also very reliable systems. And Jandy has some new models on the market. I'm actually going to try to talk to Jandy, get them on an interview to talk about their new salt systems that they have, that they offer. So stay tuned for that podcast. And then of course I have a bunch of generic type salt systems on my pool route, which are actually really good. The saltwater pool systems actually started with the generic systems. The big manufacturers jumped on board later. So if you get an off-brand system, check the reviews. There's a lot of good ones out there. You're going to have really good results with them. You're not going to have too many problems with them. Again, saltwater systems started with these off-brand companies that made these salt systems, and then the big manufacturers jumped on board and started making their own. The big manufacturers have more marketing behind them, so you're going to see more visibility with Pentair, Hayward, and Jandy. But don't discount the generic salt generators. They're really good also. And that brings me to a salt system that just came on the market a couple months ago. It's the Line system, and it's sold by Inyo Pools. And actually, I think they manufacture this particular system themselves and sell it. And this particular system looks a lot like the Hayward Aquarite system, and it sells starting at $4.49. And I definitely would recommend checking that out because it looks just like the Hayward Aquarite salt system. So I think you're going to have very good results with it, and the price is just unbelievably low for a saltwater system. And you can find more about that system at inyopools.com, and they're good friends of mine. They don't give me any money to promote them, and they also have a 44-page salt pool ebook that's available for free on their website. You can read more about salt systems from Inyo Pools. And again, check out their Line system. I think you'd find it looks a lot like the Hayward system, and you're going to probably have the same reliability getting that system if you decide to go with a saltwater pool. So let me touch right now some of the benefits I think you'll have if you convert your regular chlorine pool to a saltwater pool. Of course, the first benefit is that it will generate chlorine and add it to your pool without you having to do it, which is a great time saver. Also a great thing because your pool generally won't run out of chlorine, won't get algae, and it's just a great, easy way to maintain the pool. So the number one benefit of a saltwater pool is that it just makes your life easier. You won't be running to the pool store to get shock or trichlor tablets. And the salt is a very effective way to chlorinate the pool and sanitize it. So that's the main benefit that I see in a saltwater pool, is that you're just not going to be adding chlorine week to week. It's just a great benefit. Some of the downsides of a saltwater pool, you need to know that it's going to raise your pH in the pool. One of the side effects of the chlorine generating is that the pH will go up, and it'll go up pretty constantly, consistently, and it'll go up pretty high. Don't be surprised if you're looking at 8.2, 8.4, even higher with the pH in the saltwater pool. You may also notice that the calcium hardness will go up in a saltwater pool. One great way to counter the pH as it's rising in the pool is to add borates to the pool water. If you add borates to 30 parts per million in your pool, it will actually help curb the pH rising in a saltwater pool. It's still going to go up, but it won't go up as drastically or as high. And if you just had a brand new pool installed or replastered, you're going to notice that if you have a saltwater generator and you have a new plaster, that the pH is going to be really high. The reason for this is that the new plaster is going to have a high acid demand, so you're going to require to add a lot of pH to the plaster in the first 6 to 8 months, and the saltwater generator is going to also raise the pH. So be aware that in a new pool with a saltwater generator, the pH is going to be even higher than typically found in a saltwater pool. So that's one of the drawbacks with the saltwater pool, is that it raises the pH pretty high, pretty substantially in the pool week to week. So you'll be adding a lot of muriatic acid to bring the pool back into balance. It's not a super major drawback, but you have to be aware of that fact that it does cause problems with the pH. Another negative, I think, of the saltwater systems is the price of the unit itself. You're not really going to be saving any money with a saltwater pool, although that Pure Line one I mentioned for $500, that's a good deal. But still, you have to get a new salt cell every 3 to 5 years. And if you're using the BBB method with chlorine or bleach, you realize that you're not going to be spending, over the course of 3 to 5 years, anywhere near $500 to $600 in chemical usage, especially since the wintertime, the chlorine usage drops dramatically. So typically for the 3 to 5 month summer season, in most areas, you're not going to be spending $100 or $200 on liquid chlorine. So there's no cost savings with the saltwater system. It's basically just a preference because you don't have to add the chlorine to the pool, and it does it for you. Also, another drawback with the saltwater pools is that the salt cell itself will start to develop calcium on the plates. Since the pH is high in the water, it's going to start to develop calcium on those plates inside the salt cell, which means that it's not going to operate sometimes. The calcium will block the electricity from doing what it's supposed to do, which is producing the chlorine. So be aware that when the salt cell gets dirty, you have to take it off and clean it with either acid or vinegar, and that will clean off the calcium on the plates. Put it back in, and you should be good to go. So that's one of the drawbacks with the saltwater systems, is that they do stop producing when the calcium gets on the plates. And again, another drawback I mentioned a few times already, is that the lifespan of the salt cell is finite. So 3 to 5 years, you have to buy a new cell. So don't think that if you get talked into doing a saltwater pool that you're going to save money. You're not. It's just a matter of convenience, and that's about the only benefit that I can see with a saltwater pool. I have one in my house myself. I really like the fact that I don't have to go out there and put the chlorine in the pool. I just set it for a percentage, and it does its job. So it almost sounds like I'm discouraging you from getting a salt system in this podcast, but not really. I think that if you can afford the salt system and going into it it's not going to save you money, then definitely go for it. It's a great way to save time, and it's very convenient having something add chlorine to your pool. You don't have to worry about that aspect of your pool care. So let me touch on one of the myths about saltwater pool, is that when you're swimming in the saltwater pool, it's going to be like swimming in the ocean, and that's definitely not true. The ocean has a salt level of about 35,000 parts per million. So compare that to a human tear that has 6,000 parts per million, and then your saltwater pool, generally it will generate chlorine with 3,100 to 3,400 parts per million. So it's nowhere near as salty as the ocean. You may taste a little bit of the salt in the saltwater pool, but it's not going to be anything like swimming in the ocean. So that's one of the misnomers about a salt pool, that is, you're swimming in the ocean when you have a saltwater pool, and that's not true. Another myth is that the saltwater pool will ruin your deck, and that's just not true. I do a lot of, like I said, on my pool route I have about 35 saltwater pools. I have one on my house also, and the salt will not corrode the deck of your pool. It just doesn't have enough salt to do that. I mean, if you have your salt at 8 or 9,000 parts per million, maybe you're going to see some problems with your decking. But in most cases, with 3,100 parts per million, I haven't seen any kind of deterioration with the surface around the pool from the splash out of the salt. And again, it's splashing out of the pool, so it's not going to be the full amount of salt getting on your deck. If you take a bag of salt, 40-pound bag, and dump it on your deck and then leave it on there for a month or two, then maybe you're going to have a problem. But generally speaking, that's just a myth that's propagated by, I don't know how that got out there, to tell you the truth, but it's not going to happen. Another one is that the salt will destroy your pool equipment. And I must say that if you have a salt level of 6,000 parts per million, you're going to have some effect on your equipment. But no, generally speaking, your pump, your filter, there's no damage done to it with the saltwater generator producing salt. I've had my saltwater generator in my pool for 9 years now, and everything is running fine. Never had any problem with the equipment on my pool. So that's definitely a misnomer that the salt will destroy your pool equipment. And I guess the last myth is that the saltwater system is just too hard to use and it's not user friendly. That's very far from the truth. It's very easy to read most salt systems, it'll give you the percentage of the production. It'll allow you to adjust the salt production. Again, I mentioned earlier that the only time they break down really is when the calcium builds up in the plates in the cell, and that causes it not to produce the chlorine that it needs to produce. So be aware of that fact. But as far as it being difficult to operate, it's actually very simple. It's a great way to maintain the chlorine level in your pool. So don't be intimidated when you see the salt system. It's really simple to use. They're all basically the same. You just set a percentage, you run it a certain amount of time per day, and that produces the chlorine for your pool. And last, let me just touch on the salt itself that you're going to put in the pool. There's special pool salt that you have to purchase. I would go with a good name brand pool salt. If you go with a cheap pool salt, it may have impurities that could stain the surface. But generally speaking, if you go with a reputable brand of pool salt, you just dump the bag in the pool. It won't have no effect on the plaster or pool surface. And the salt, sold in 40-pound bags. You don't really need to add salt every year to recharge your pool. So let's say you have a 20,000 gallon pool. So initially on startup of a saltwater pool, you're going to have to add about 520 pounds of salt to this pool, which is about 13 40-pound bags of salt, which seems like a lot of salt, but it's really not a lot considering how big the pool is and how many gallons of water is in the pool. So once you add the initial salt, the only way the salt gets out of your pool is through backwashing your filter and splash out of your pool. The salt does not evaporate, so it stays in the pool. So after the next season, when you start up your pool, you may need to add 1 or 2 bags of salt in your pool to get everything up to the parts per million to get the salt generating in your pool, the chlorine generating in your pool. So it's not like you're going to be adding hundreds of pounds of salt every season. So initially, after you add the initial charge of salt, you just have to add a maintenance dose of salt through the seasons. And the salt's actually really affordable. It's not a huge expense either when you do the salt startup. So don't let that discourage you. As far as adding salt every season, just going to need a minor amount to recharge the pool. Let me just touch briefly on how to test the salt level in your pool or the salinity level. The best way to do this is with a digital salinity tester. They sell some online for as low as $20. I prefer the Hawk or the Lamont brand. These are made for the pool industry, so they're very reliable and durable. They come with a 1-year warranty, so they're great electronic testers. You can also use these salt water test strips. They're pretty good. The only problem with those is that there's some user error with that. And also a lot of the salt systems will display the salinity level of your pool. So you can check your control panel to see what the salt level is in your pool. So those are the various ways you can test it. You can rely on the system itself, or you can get an electronic tester, or you can try the sodium chloride test strips. You can also take a water sample into your local pool store, and they'll be happy to run the salinity test for you to see what the level of your salt is in your pool. So let me recap here. Number 1, a saltwater system is not going to save you money on your chemical cost. The initial cost of the unit, plus installation, plus the replacement salt cells, is a much more expensive way to sanitize your pool than using liquid chlorine or just Clorox bleach in your pool. So it's not a money-saving thing, but it is a great convenience thing. So if you can afford it, and if you want to convert to salt, that's a great benefit of it, is the fact that it just adds the chlorine for you, and it makes maintaining your pool that much more easier. And like I mentioned in the beginning, there are many manufacturers who make saltwater generators, so do your research and make sure you pick the right one for your particular pool. And so I'm really excited to have this new format that I can bring you all this information on. I hope that you found this podcast helpful, talking about saltwater pools, and that it answers some of your questions. Of course, if you have any more questions, you can definitely email me the questions. If you go to the podcast on my website, I have a new comment box. You can actually just put a comment in there or a question regarding any podcast, and I'll be sure to answer questions. I did have a question come in about the scum line in a fiberglass pool and how it's always getting this scum line on the pool. And that's typically normal in a pool with suntan lotion, heavy bathing loads. You're going to get some kind of scum line on your tile, or a fiberglass vinyl pool. Right at the water line, you're going to get some kind of scum buildup. And there's a product that I use on my route that really helps with this. It's called Pool Perfect by Natural Chemistry. And it's actually an enzyme that breaks down the things that will cause a scum to form on the tile line. And it's actually very effective. I use it on a couple of pools on my route that have dogs that swim in there all the time. And it keeps that dogs are really bad for the pool, in case you didn't know. But one of the side effects of the dog swimming is that the scum line is really thick, and I have to scrub it all the time. So the Pool Perfect I've been adding to these particular pools with dogs that swim have kept the scum to very minimal. So it's a great product. Again, it's called Pool Perfect by Natural Chemistry. It's an enzyme that's proven to be effective in reducing the scum line on your pool. So that question was sent to me, and they wanted to know how they can get rid of that scum line and keep it from forming week to week. And again, that enzyme is a great product. I definitely would recommend it. So thanks for listening to this podcast today. I want to thank Steve again for the great new theme song. You're going to hear it again on the outro here. And enjoy the rest of your day, and God bless.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.